Okay, so I believe last time I concluded by talking about the end of this slide about the United States being only 5% of the world's population, yet having 25% of the world's incarcerated. And then concluded with the recidivism rate, where 50% of the people who get out of prison end up back in prison within 3 years. And so, this whole premise of, I don't know, we're teaching people a lesson. Well, 50% are clearly not learning the lesson we think they're going to learn by spending all this money and having people incarcerated. And so yeah, again, just looking at the rate of incarceration and just how the US is higher than any country or was in the 2010s. There have been improvements since 2009. The rate has been coming down. Um, but you can see, we can think of kind of some of the most tyrannical countries we can think of in the world, and we had a higher rate than them in terms of incarceration. And it never affected our own sense of self of being the land of the free and being associated with freedom and liberty and all those things we tell ourselves. So this helps us get a big picture, and it's more updated. I think, yeah, this must be from 2025 numbers, and so more than half of people incarcerated are in state prisons. And the percentage of those that are in prison for drug-related offenses has gone down. In 2009, it was closer to half of the people in prison were there because of drug offenses. We have people in federal prisons, and then, we have within that kind of a close-up here of the people that are in immigrant detention. Those are the ones that are privatized that I mentioned earlier or in the previous lecture. And then this might also be eye-catching. Most of the people that are in jail are not in jail because they've been convicted of a crime. Most of the people in jail, and you can see here, much more that are not convicted than the ones that are, uh, more than three times more, are there because they cannot afford bail. And so when people are accused of a crime, they get put in jail, and then they're told, okay, your court date is going to be, 2 months from now. And that's when you're going to see a judge that's going to decide whether you're guilty or not. And in the meantime, you can negotiate a settlement where uh, you can, how does it go? You can either contest it and go to court, or you can negotiate a plea agreement where you uh, accept a smaller potential penalty of what it could, as bad as it could be. Um, and so, yeah, the people that accept, kind of accept that they're not going to contest it, can either be in the convicted category if it's a small crime, or can end up in the state prisons if it's a larger crime. But and then if you're going to contest it and have your court date, show up for your court date, uh, you have the option of posting bail so that you don't have to be in prison while you're fighting your case. But if you cannot afford bail, then you don't have a choice. You're in jail until your court date. Um, yeah, and then I'll talk about the immigration people more in the next section. Yeah, Connor.
Where is signature bonds going? This part.
Say that again.
Signature bonds?
Where are signature bonds in this? And so, yeah, so okay, so I think what you're referring to, and feel free to correct me, in recent years, there's been reforms to try to diminish the number of people in prison. And so there's been efforts to make bail more accessible to people who can't afford it. And so there can be situations where they say, we don't think you're a flight risk, we don't think you're a danger to society, and so then we can have some kind of alternative. Is that what a signature bond is? Okay. And so they wouldn't be incarcerated, so they wouldn't be on this chart. Yeah. There we go. Yeah. And then there are other people that are not on this chart. Those are the people that are part of the criminal justice system, but are not incarcerated. And that would, here's people in prison and jail. And like I said, numbers have gone down since 2009. Those are people on parole who, once they're released from prison or jail, they're not 100% free. When they're released, they're told, okay, you cannot associate with street gang members, or you cannot commit another crime, even if it's something small, or you have to have an address. You need to, there's a lot of conditions that they're given. You can't use any drugs and so forth. And so if they're caught violating anything regarding their parole, then they can easily be taken back to prison. And so those are the people on parole. And then there's the people on probation. And so that is people who might commit a first offense, and they're told, okay, um, we could send you to jail, but your lawyer convinced us to just give you probation. And, you can't commit any crimes during the 6 months or year of probation. Otherwise, you're going to go to jail. And so this could also include people, people that are like what we call house arrest, or people with monitors, um, GPS monitors on their ankles, which is that's another way in which they're seeking to save money, by, instead of having to pay for someone to be in jail, they can put a monitor on them and be like, okay, you're confined to your house, or you can only go to work and straight back home. And the monitor, can be tracked to make sure that's what they do and stuff like that. And so they're all the people that are caught up in the criminal justice system but are not incarcerated. And so if you include those numbers, the number of people wrapped up in the criminal justice system gets higher. And so again, the peak is reached in 2009. In 2009, we see the first drop since the early 1970s. And fortunately, that drop has continued. There's been significant reforms the last 10 plus years that have been leading to a smaller, lower incarceration rate in the United States. Some examples. In Florida, they created reentry centers where when someone was nearing the end of their prison sentence, they would be put in a lower security prison. And the lower the security, the less it costs the state to incarcerate people. And so by putting them in a lower, yeah, they save money by doing that. The other thing is in these reentry centers, they're also they have opportunities for them to learn skills that they can use once they get out of prison to get a decent job, and not fall into whatever caused them to go to prison in the first place. This also gives them more freedom. They have more ability to kind of control their day-to-day routine, and so that also gets them, kind of as a transition to being out of prison when you don't have this big institution controlling your every move. So yeah, teaching skills that people can use. Uh, I have a nephew who was part of a street gang in Southern California, and he and a couple guys robbed a store, like uh, and there it's like a 7-Eleven in I don't know, kind of like a Quick Trip here. And he was, I think he was the getaway driver. And he ended up getting something like 12 years in prison for that. And then and this was in California, and while he was there, I remember he learned how to weld. And so, and I haven't stayed in touch with him, so I don't know how much of that welding skill he ended up applying, but I knew he had that. I do know that he's managed to not go back to prison. That I do know. So yeah, good news. The drop in the incarceration rate has continued. Other things that have happened in the last 10 years or so. 2013, there were big hunger strikes in California prisons. The largest hunger strike in US history, with 30,000 inmates participating. And this in particular was a protest against indefinite isolation. And so at, decades ago, to put someone in solitary confinement was a temporary punishment for people who would violate rules while incarcerated. But they got so comfortable doing it that people put in would were put in isolation for years, without an end in sight. And so that's what the end and keeping them isolated makes people lose their mental health. And so yeah, there was that going on as well. The prisoners doing whatever was within their means to do to try to change things as well. In 2014, California voters voted in favor of Proposition 47, which reduced the jail time for nonviolent drug and property crimes. And so that was another reform that happened that the public supported, at least in California. And then there's been a rise in the use of house arrest and ankle monitors that I mentioned earlier. Ben?
So what can be considered property crime? Is it just like vandalism or is it like theft?
Yeah, and I don't know, because I know there's like a difference between burglary and theft, and there's some other one. There's like different, like one is, you just taking people's property. Another one is if you used force or the threat of force to get it. And there's another one too. Um, and so yeah, but I think the point is that they were trying to reduce the jail time for people that are not considered a threat to society. You know, yeah. And so they must have been people who did not use force in stealing property. But you're right, damaging property like doing graffiti, might be considered under that category too, not just taking property. Yeah. So yeah, the use of house arrest and ankle monitors have been a way to save money. You don't need to pay anyone to watch over them or keep them incarcerated or feed them, any of those things. And the people have a little bit more, they're not being indoctrinated on how to be a criminal by other criminals while they're incarcerated. Uh, and so there's good things. But on the other hand, it's also become really convenient for the criminal justice system to turn to this, which is really increasing the number of people, that fall under the probation. Although this is contradicting what I said. So I gotta, yeah, maybe I have to rethink that. I think that's my concern without ankle monitors. Maybe it's an unmerited concern. Anyone, comments, questions about any of this?